Here at Niagara Falls, 150,000 gallons per second pours over the top.
Niagara Falls is known around the world for its size, its sound, and its raw force. Millions stand at the edge and believe they are seeing the whole story.
And you just feel like a tiny little speck in the water that surrounds you.
But the ground beneath the falls tells a different one. Beneath sits a vast structure that was built, sealed, and almost completely erased from public memory. Hidden power beneath the falls. More than a century ago, Niagara Falls was already one of the most recognizable natural landmarks on Earth. People traveled long distances just to see the water plunge over the edge and feel the ground tremble beneath their feet. But even then, some people were not looking at the falls for beauty alone. They were looking at power. The sheer force of the river was impossible to ignore. And to a growing group of engineers, investors, and industrial planners, it looked like an opportunity waiting to be claimed. At the surface, visitors saw chaos and motion. Water rushed forward without pause, striking rock with relentless force. Beneath that surface, however, a different way of thinking was taking shape. Engineers began asking difficult questions. How much energy was being wasted every second? How could that force be controlled? More importantly, where could it be directed? These questions did not lead upward toward towers or machinery at first. They led downward into the rock itself. According to early reports and later recollections, local workers and settlers began noticing strange signs near the riverbanks. Small trenches appeared where water once flowed freely. Narrow channels were cut into stone, then quickly covered or hidden from view. Some locals claimed that these early works were never meant to be seen by the public. They were practical, quiet, and deliberate. According to local accounts, people living nearby reported hearing the sound of tools striking rock late at night, long after visible work had stopped. The noises were described as dull, repeated impacts echoing from below the ground. At the time, no one spoke openly about tunnels, but whispers circulated among workers that water was being guided beneath the surface. Initial efforts to harness the waterfall were cautious. There were no massive structures yet and no grand plans revealed to the public. Instead, small conduits were carved into rock to test how water could be redirected. These early channels were shallow and limited in reach, but they proved something critical. The river could be controlled. Once that realization took hold, fear and excitement grew side by side. Some worried about what interfering with such a powerful natural force might cause. Others saw profit and progress just beneath their feet. As years passed, these modest changes began to add up. The land around Niagara Falls did not change all at once. It shifted slowly and deliberately. Beneath factories, paths, and open ground, rock was being cut away piece by piece. According to some reports, workers often did not know the full purpose of what they were digging. They followed instructions, cut stone, and moved on, unaware that they were contributing to something much larger. However, these early efforts did not move forward without resistance. According to later reports and unverified local accounts, many of the small underground works faced serious limits. Water pressure was difficult to predict, and some early channels flooded soon after being cut. In other cases, sections of rock weakened or shifted, forcing workers to seal passages and abandon them. Without advanced tools or a clear long-term plan, these early experiments slowed. They did not disappear, but they went quiet. As European explorers and settlers continued mapping the region and documenting its features, their records captured both the fear inspired by the falls and the growing interest in its potential. Those records would soon guide the first serious attempts to turn Niagara into an industrial engine, pushing human activity further below the surface and setting the stage for everything that followed. European discovery and early industrial seeds. When European explorers first reached Niagara Falls, they were not thinking about industry. They were trying to understand what they were seeing. In 1678, French explorer Father Louis Hennepin published one of the earliest written descriptions of the falls. He described them as violent, overwhelming, and difficult to comprehend. His account focused on scale and force. The water did not simply fall, it crashed with such intensity that he believed it could not be matched anywhere else in the world. For many decades after that first account, Niagara Falls remained mostly untouched. Small settlements formed nearby, but they were cautious. The river was respected and feared. Early communities on both sides of the border relied on fishing, trade, and small farming efforts. The falls were admired from a distance. People knew the river was powerful, but they did not yet know how to use that power safely or consistently. By the 18th century, that attitude began to change. As populations grew and industries expanded elsewhere, settlers started experimenting with mechanical mills. These early mills did not rely on underground systems. They used visible water channels and shallow diversions that redirected part of the river's flow. Wooden flumes and open races carried water to simple water wheels. These structures were easy to build and easy to repair, but they were limited. They could not support large operations, and they were vulnerable to damage. As demand increased, mill owners pushed for more reliable solutions. Some operators began cutting short passages into the rock to feed water directly into wheel pits. These early tunnels were crude. Workers used hand tools and worked in confined spaces with little room to stand upright. The rock layers were uneven, and progress was slow. Still, these passages allowed for better control of water speed and direction. These early underground works were not part of a unified plan. They were built out of necessity rather than design. One mill would add a short tunnel, then another would extend a passage slightly farther. According to some reports, mill owners rarely shared plans, which led to a scattered network of disconnected underground spaces. The goal was simple: keep the water moving and keep the machines running. Despite their rough nature, these passages marked an important shift. They showed that underground construction was possible and useful. Workers learned how the rock behaved when cut. They learned where water pooled and where it surged. By the early 19th century, it became clear that these improvised tunnels could not support the growing industrial appetite around the falls. Production demands were rising, and the existing methods were stretched to their limits. This realization pushed engineers and planners to think bigger, leading directly into the era of hydraulic canals and structured underground systems that would soon reshape the entire region. Hydraulic canals and mill tunnel networks. By the early 1850s, Niagara Falls was no longer viewed as a place for small experiments. Industry demanded scale, control, and reliability. This pressure led to the first major underground engineering project beneath the city. In 1853, the Falls Hydraulic Power and Manufacturing Company began cutting a hydraulic canal designed to deliver water directly to factories. This was not an experiment. It was a commitment to reshape the ground itself. Construction moved slowly and carefully. Crews worked year after year, cutting through earth and stone with limited tools. The canal was completed in 1861, and it changed everything. Water from the river was now guided into a controlled channel that fed a growing industrial district. From the main canal, smaller tunnels were carved to carry water into wheel pits beneath factories. These tunnels were narrow and low, often only 8 to 12 feet high, but they were precisely measured to maintain steady flow. Workers relied on hand tools and early blasting powders to shape these passages. Chisels were driven into hard rock for hours at a time. Small charges were placed carefully, since too much force could collapse a tunnel or flood it instantly. Engineers paid close attention to slope and angle. If the gradient was wrong, the water could surge too fast or stall entirely. Every cut mattered, and mistakes were dangerous. Manual gates were installed along the system to control water volume. Operators adjusted these gates by hand, opening or closing the flow based on demand inside the mills. This allowed multiple factories to draw power from the same canal without overwhelming the system. According to historical records, this level of control was considered advanced for its time. It allowed machines to run more smoothly, and for longer hours. As more factories were built, additional tunnels were added. These passages did not exist in isolation. They began connecting beneath adjacent buildings, forming early underground networks. According to later inspections, some workers moved between sites below ground rather than at street level. What started as simple water routes slowly became a hidden layer beneath the city. Conditions underground were harsh and frightening. According to reports, collapses were a constant threat. Water leaks could turn a tunnel into a death trap within minutes. Workers labored in darkness, with poor air circulation and little warning if something went wrong. Despite the risks, construction continued because the demand for power was relentless. These tunnels became the lifeblood of Niagara's early industries. Paper mills depended on steady motion. Chemical works required consistent energy to keep processes stable. Entire businesses rose and fell based on the water moving through unseen channels below their floors. Few visitors knew that while they stood above ground, an industrial system was running beneath them. By the late 19th century, however, limits began to appear. Mechanical water power could only go so far. Engineers began looking for a way to convert Niagara's force into something more flexible. That search would push underground construction to an entirely new scale, setting the stage for the next transformation. Electricity, Tesla, and the deep power tunnels. By the late 19th century, Niagara Falls stood at the center of a global argument about the future of energy. Thomas Edison promoted direct current systems that worked over short distances. Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse argued for alternating current, which could travel far beyond the power source. The debate was intense, and reputations were on the line. Niagara Falls became the place where the argument would be settled in stone and rock. Alternating current needed more than generators and wires. It needed massive control over water movement on a scale never attempted before. Engineers selected Niagara because its constant flow offered unmatched reliability. What followed was not just the construction of a power plant, but the excavation of some of the largest underground tunnels ever attempted at the time. The Adams Power Plant No. 1 required a tail race tunnel unlike anything built before beneath the falls. This tunnel was designed to carry used water away from turbines and back toward the river without disrupting the surface. Crews carved deep into the gorge, cutting a passage roughly 18 to 20 feet high. The shape was carefully chosen. The curved, horseshoe-like profile allowed water to move smoothly, while keeping the surrounding rock stable under pressure. Excavation was slow and dangerous. Workers removed rock by hand and with controlled blasts. According to reports from the period, misjudged charges could crack surrounding stone or cause sudden leaks. Timber supports were installed as work progressed, holding walls in place until permanent linings could be added. Brick and stone were used in weaker sections where collapse risk was highest. Every foot forward carried the fear of flooding or cave-in. Once completed, the tunnel carried enormous volumes of water. Tens of thousands of gallons moved through it every second, unseen by the public. Above ground, the plant appeared orderly and calm. Below it, water rushed through a confined space with tremendous force. Some engineers reportedly worried about long-term stress on the tunnel walls, though the system continued to operate successfully. The moment of proof came on November 16, 1896. Electricity generated at Niagara reached Buffalo, more than 26 miles away. It was a shock to the world. Alternating current had won. Factories lit up, streetlights turned on, and the idea of centralized power became real. Beneath all of it, the tunnel remained hidden, doing its work silently. According to some later accounts, the success of the Adams plant changed how engineers thought about underground construction. Tunnels were no longer secondary features. They became essential arteries in a growing electrical system. Niagara was no longer just shaping industry. It was shaping cities far beyond its edge. Yet this transformation did not stop at the border that cuts directly through the river and the falls themselves. Niagara is shared between two countries, and every major diversion of water on one side affects the other. As power generation expanded on the American shore, Canadian engineers and officials watched closely, aware that the river's flow could not be taken for granted. According to historical records, this realization pushed Canada to plan its own underground systems to secure access to the same water. These projects would drive tunnels deeper and wider beneath the falls, quietly expanding the hidden network in ways few people standing above ground ever noticed. Canadian expansion and Ontario power tunnels. By the early 20th century, Canada recognized that controlling the water flow of the Niagara River was crucial for its own industrial growth. The Ontario Power Company began a major project in 1904, constructing a hydroelectric plant next to Horseshoe Falls. This was not a minor undertaking. The plan relied on a vast underground network of tunnels that would channel water to turbines far below the surface. Unlike the smaller American tunnels, these Canadian conduits were built with both scale and permanence in mind. Engineers coordinated multiple excavation points to speed up the work. Crews dug from access shafts along the proposed tunnel lines while simultaneously starting at intake portals at the river's edge. According to reports, this required careful planning to avoid collapses and to ensure that water flow could be precisely managed. Each section of the tunnel had to meet exact specifications to maintain a steady gradient and prevent flooding. The local geology presented both advantages and obstacles. Upper dolomite layers provided strong natural support for wide tunnels. Beneath them, softer strata were prone to shifting and erosion. To counter this, engineers reinforced vulnerable areas with brick and concrete linings. These reinforcements were applied meticulously, one layer at a time, to ensure the tunnels could withstand the tremendous force of water moving through them. The main tunnel stretched over 2,000 feet in length. Lateral branches fed 15 turbine draft tubes beneath the powerhouse. Steel gates installed at the intake points allowed operators to control the water flow, regulating pressure and ensuring that the turbines ran at optimal speed. According to some reports, the tunnels were capable of moving tens of thousands of cubic feet of water per second without interruption. Construction relied heavily on human labor. Immigrant workers, including Italians, Poles, and Hungarians, endured long shifts with only lanterns for light. They used hand tools to drill, chisel, and shape the rock. Some sections were blasted with early explosives, requiring precise timing to prevent dangerous collapses. The work was exhausting, physically demanding, and perilous. Yet the tunnels steadily took shape beneath the surface. Once operational, these tunnels supplied power not only to the powerhouse, but also to factories, streetcar systems, and electric grids across southern Ontario. The network allowed Canada to compete with the American side, providing reliable electricity to a rapidly industrializing region. Despite the scale and sophistication of the project, the mid-20th century brought challenges. New regulations, centralized water control, and larger public works eventually reduced the need for these privately built tunnels. Over time, portions were abandoned, filled in, or buried beneath modern buildings. Today, much of this early engineering remains hidden, a forgotten layer beneath the city that few ever see. This quiet disappearance set the stage for the next phase of Niagara's subterranean story, where even larger and more complex tunnels would rise before facing decline. Decline, and the vast abandoned tunnel network. As the 20th century progressed, the world above Niagara Falls changed dramatically, and the subterranean landscape followed suit. Mills and factories that had once relied on water power gradually shifted to electricity, rendering the carefully carved tunnels and conduits beneath the surface obsolete. Tail races and wheel pits that had once roared with the flow of tens of thousands of gallons per second fell silent. Some tunnels clogged with debris, others partially collapsed, and in certain areas, engineers deliberately filled them with rubble to stabilize foundations. Above ground, new streets, warehouses, and industrial complexes rose, masking any trace of the hidden underworld. To the casual observer, the ground was solid and unremarkable. Beneath it, however, an entire industrial empire lay frozen in time. For decades, no one ventured into these tunnels. Access points were sealed, waterlogged, and dangerous. Rumors circulated among locals of underground chambers, lost passages, and strange echoes that carried through the night. Whispers of hidden rooms, collapsed machinery, and forgotten tools fueled a mixture of fear and fascination. Some claimed they had glimpsed shadows moving through cracks in the gorge, though none could confirm what lay beneath. The network became the subject of urban legends, stories passed cautiously from one generation of workers to the next. Then, in 2018, a team of engineers and archaeologists began a survey beneath the streets and industrial lots near the American and Canadian sides of the falls. They were expecting to locate a few remnants of old conduits and possibly confirm maps of known tunnels. What they found, however, shocked them. Buried under decades of rubble and sediment, previously unknown sections of the tunnel network emerged. Rusted turbines, abandoned piping, and heavy machinery frozen in place for decades lay scattered throughout the chambers. According to reports, some equipment dated back nearly a century, offering the team an unprecedented window into the scale and sophistication of early hydroelectric engineering. The sheer size of some chambers left the researchers speechless. In several sections, the brick-lined arches soared high above their heads, while other passages were narrow, barely wide enough for a single person to crawl through. The discovery revealed that the network was far more interconnected than anyone had imagined. Tunnels extended beneath both the American and Canadian sides, linking multiple historic power stations and industrial facilities. Water that once powered mills and turbines flowed through multiple levels, controlled with gates, channels, and gradients engineered with remarkable precision. Evidence of past disasters, structural collapses, and maintenance work was still visible, frozen in time, offering clues about the enormous effort required to tame the falls. Standing above ground, even the most experienced engineers could not comprehend the extent of what lay below. The tunnels stretched for thousands of feet, an invisible lattice that had carried energy across the region while remaining entirely hidden from the world above. The researchers described a mixture of awe and disbelief. Walking through the forgotten corridors, they could feel the weight of history pressing down from the rock walls and ceilings. And the silence in the chambers was almost deafening compared to the roar of the falls above. If you enjoyed watching this video, hit the like button and subscribe to this channel.